from my study and from my reading of this study, it doesn't apply to businesses only. It looks like the principles apply to each one of us. So I want you to take your time to think about it, to meditate about it, and even go home and study about principles listed in this tract and in this training, so that it helps you to prosper in the things you are going to do. I believe the Lord it's His interest to prosper us, but we need to be positioned for that prosperity, so that some of the principles we are learning out of this teaching will be a blessing to us. Business and economy and indeed life needs to be stewarded. So we need to model stewardship as Christians. So what are some of the biblical principles we can learn from the Bible? The first is that we need to store up your treasure in heaven. Number one, you have the book, Store Up Your Treasure in Heaven. This is, a principle that Christ taught, so that we don't store up our treasure on earth where moth and vermin destroy, or where thieves steal. This is in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 21. But we need to store up treasure in heaven. So as Christians, we need to model that lifestyle where our giving is to the needy, to ministries, to evangelism, to ministers, and indeed as the Lord leads you. So it's something that has to be lifestyle. It is life. It is the way you do your things. And it is important that we do that. Not to be seen. The protocols were a lot of the things of giving. You don't do it so that even your right hand does not know what your left hand is doing. Let's try and do it within those protocols. Our society, and right even Christ's time, people trumpeted what they were doing, and so did not get the blessings. So it's important, and there's still a lot of, in churches, in our situations, there's a lot of immaturity. So sometimes it can be misused. So they get into protocols, get into systems that you can still do the same thing without looking for recognition. But it is important that we still proceeded with that. The second thing is giving money to worthy causes will set you on the path to wealth. Giving money to worthy causes will set you on the path to wealth. Several verses talk about that. Luke chapter 6, verse 38. The same measure you give is the measure that will be used to give back to you. In 2 Corinthians 9:6, he who sows sparingly will reap sparingly, but he who sows bountifully will reap bountifully. So it is, even Galatians 6, that whatever a man sows, he reaps. So it's important that we live it, not sporadically, but if it can be a consistent and it becomes a lifestyle. Giving money, generosity is something that is there. Number 3 is how do you feel about yourself is how others will see you. How you feel about yourself. That's what it needs to be put in. How you feel about yourself is how others will see you. And this is an important and a critical attribute of life. The passage reminds us of when Israel were just about to enter Canaan. And Moses in Deuteronomy says that it's the people who told him that let them send spies. And so he felt it, so it was a good idea. So they sent spies into Canaan. And so 12 spies went into Canaan, one from each tribe. And when the spies came, they came with not a good report. Because it's actually what they saw. It was an honest report. It wasn't a good report, but it was an honest report because they saw giants. And so they saw that there were grasshoppers within they saw themselves as grasshoppers in front of the giants, which was true, but it was not God's report. So sometimes an honest report may not be God's report. So let us live a lifestyle and model a lifestyle of hearing what God is saying about a situation, and then that will be our report. That's the principle that is here. And you know the consequences of what Israel did is that the entire generation, other than Caleb and Joshua, did not go into the promised land because they refused to believe God's report. And of course, that has significance today, that we need to believe God's report. Let us take time, let us be sensitive to hear what God is saying about a situation, and let that be our report. Okay? Let that be our view. So, God can see it as being lack of faith when we don't believe his report, when we believe other reports. The fourth is become a people person. Become a people person. In Psalms 133, it says how good and pleasant when God's people live together. Then it says the Lord commands a blessing in unity. So there is a blessing in unity. So it is important that we learn that in whatever we do, we become people person so that we can attract that blessing. Number 5 is earning and profits are God's ways of rewarding us for forming relationships with others. Earnings and profits are God's ways of rewarding us for forming relationships with others. Money is the consequence of doing the right thing. So what are some of the challenges encountered while doing business in the kingdom way in today's marketplace? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the challenges that we encounter? The first one is not having a fellowship of like-minded Christians in that business. And then indeed, this is life. We need to have fellowships of like-minded Christians in business and in the businesses, in the activities, in the economy of what we do. Acts chapter 2 verse 42 to 45 says, they devoted, this was the first Christians, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. And it goes on. So this is something that is a principle we need to incorporate wherever we do, whatever work we are doing. Let's look for situations and circumstances where we have fellowships to help us so that we don't end up being incorporated into cartels and into all sorts of difficult situations. Number 2 is the effects of peer pressure and unfair competition. Effects of peer pressure and unfair competition. Feel the word unfair. A is conduct an honest business and think for yourself. Conduct an honest business and think for yourself. Exodus chapter 23 verse 2 and 3 says, do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. This should mark a stand of Christianity. A lot of the principles we are learning are okay. They are very clear and acute in business sense, but it's really for life, that we need to be honest in doing business and don't follow the crowd. The B is, misery and sin love company. Misery and sin love company. Proverbs 4:14 to 16 says, do not set foot on the path of the wicked or walk in the way of evildoers. Avoid it, do not travel on it. Turn from it and go on your way. For they cannot rest until they do evil. They are robbed of sleep till they make someone stumble. B, peer pressure can lead to tragic consequences. Peer pressure can lead to tragic consequences. Luke in Luke chapter 23, when Jesus Christ was about to be crucified, a few people turned the crowd into shouting, "Crucify him." And it was a few, but because of peer pressure, everybody was included in that. The C is be true to God and refuse to be compromised. Be true to God and refuse to be compromised. Psalms 1, chapter 1 and 2. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, who meditates on the law day and night. So get out of those, be compromised, and it's easy, when it is money that is used to be compromised. One needs to have very clear stance in those, so that you're very clear on what you stand for. Number 3, be careful of the impact of covetousness and greed. Be careful of the impact of covetousness and greed. To be covetous means to desire someone else's wealth. Covetousness is desiring someone else's wealth. And to be greedy is the desire to gather and to hold on to wealth by any means available. So the two words, sometimes there's an old English word that was used called avarice. Avarice is both covetousness and greed. It's an aspect of both. Evil desires and greed are idolatry. Evil desires and greed. Colossians chapter 3 verse 5 says, put to death therefore whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which is idolatry. Hebrews 13:5 also says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. There are the two passages, and indeed all in Scripture, there are two words that we need to be conscious about. Put to death in Colossians, and in Hebrews it says, keep your lives free. Meaning the onus is on you. The onus is on you. God does not do this for you. The onus is on you to put to death those vices, to keep free from the love of money. So the onus is on us as Christians. And therefore, there are ways and things of doing to be able to put those things to death. To be able to put to death, to be able to keep ourselves from those. And right through all vices, it is the onus, and God has given us the choice to make and to put those things to death. Covetous, number 4, covetous gain leads to destruction. Covetous gain leads to destruction. And the example is a very pertinent example that is given. It talks of King Saul. King Saul was the first king of Israel. And he had been made king, and he had been given the first activity to do, and he had done it quite well. Then the second one was, the Lord had told him, I want you, through Samuel the prophet, that you go back to the country and the people of Amalek and kill all the Amalekites. Because when Israel had been coming from the wilderness, coming from Egypt to Canaan, the Amalekites had attacked them and done some pretty bad things. They had attacked the weaker people and killed them. And so the Lord swore to himself that he will make sure he'll clear all the Amalekites. So one of Saul's first tasks was to go and kill all the Amalekites. And so the story goes on in 1 Samuel chapter 15 from verse 9 to 11. It says, but Samuel and the army spared Agag. Agag was the king of the Amalekites, and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and the lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Samuel had been the prophet, and he understood. So you can see Samuel's reaction to that. He cried the whole night. But what had Samuel done? Saul had been given an instruction, and he didn't do it properly. And then later when Samuel asked him, he said, I wanted to bring these ones to sacrifice. And then Samuel told him, obedience is more than sacrifice. And that disobedience is like witchcraft. So it's like he was a witch doctor, like the witch doctors we have. So it is important that some of these sins, covetousness, can be equated. You can see it's equated to idolatry. It's equated to witchcraft. These are horrible things that can be with us, especially these are accentuated in business because business transactions are that. But they could be lifestyle issues that we need to be very careful. And as it says, put to death. Put to death those things. Keep your lives free. Number 5, covetousness is never satisfied. Covetousness, greed and covetousness, you've never find satisfaction. Greed, some of the richest people are the most greedy because it's a spirit. It's no longer alive. A human being. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 5 says, indeed wine betrays him, he is arrogant and never at rest because he is as greedy as the grave and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. Paul, in writing to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3, says covetousness will abound in the last days. In the last days, covetousness will abound. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love and forgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. It is critical that we understand that and put to death those aspects of life. So how can we spread the influence of God's kingdom agenda in business and economy? The first one is practice taking the second step, or practice doing the extra mile. You remember Christ had said, if anyone forces you to do 1 mile, do a second mile. From this it means that we do more than what our contracts provide for. We all have contracts. When you're doing a contract for somebody, or even your employment contracts, it says you will work from 8 to 5 for 5 days a week. What we need to do as Christians is do more than that. Practice doing the second mile. Going to work in the evening. Working on Saturdays without pay. That ought to be a lifestyle for us. So that we do more than we exceed expectations of your employer, that ought to be a lifestyle so that we can influence society and change and transform our societies, that we can do more than what they expect. The second one is the golden rule works for you if you work it. The golden rule works if you work it. That means put yourself sometimes of the recipient of your goods or your services. Put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in the recipient. What would you want them to do for you? In Luke 6:31, he said, do to others as you would have them do to you. So think of the other person also, the recipient of the services and the goods you offer. The third is focus on profit with a purpose. Don't just focus on profit. Let our business have a kingdom agenda. We build not just for profit, but we should also think of creating of inputting God's principles in our business, or even in the ministry, or in whatever we are involved in. And God will help us on those. The fourth is stand by your yes and your no. Be decisive, be very clear, and let people know that your yes is yes and your no is no. No is a holy word, and saying no is something. So have a stand. I remember when America was being built. America was built at the turn of the last century. They did huge infrastructure projects. And a lot of those projects were on a handshake. You know, somebody's given a tender, he's told, build the road from California to New York. Huge road. But, you know, it's just on a handshake. And he did it so well that those roads are there to date. When you think about it, today, our procurement procedures are with a very thick write-up. And then we flout those, and, you know, we are in the papers every day that we don't do procurement well. You know, we write, some of the words used as we have covenanted to do this, and eventually it's not done. So it's a heart condition, really. It is not the papers that we write them on. But that's why when we say we need to live and say, our yes is yes, and our no is no. And when one has committed to fulfill something, build it to that until it becomes a lifestyle for you. Number 5 is make the move from owner to overseer. This is for businesses. This write-up was for businesses, that you need to understand the concept of moving from being an owner to an overseer. The underlying principle around this is that we understand that actually the true owner of the business is the Lord, because in Psalms 24, the earth is the Lord and all its fullness, and the world and those who dwell in it. So all we have really belongs to him. So we need to understand that we are basically an overseer and not the owner. We are not the owner. What are some of the words about an overseer? What is an overseer? An overseer is a steward. An overseer is a steward. An overseer is a manager. So remove your mentality of being an owner, become a manager. An overseer is also a bishop. The Greek word, you know, the King James didn't translate it into English. They left it to bishop. So because it remained a bishop, it has become an office. But the truth is, it's an overseer. So you are an overseer. It's not an office, but it is something you do. It's also a pastor. So transform in your businesses, become a pastor, become a shepherd. What all that means is that there is a spiritual content to the activities we have. But I tell people in Africa, most of you are Africans like me. Our problem in Africa is that we don't have overseers. We don't have overseers. We don't have even owners. There are few owners. The few owners are the very senior fellows. Most of us are not even owners. We are what I would call hirelings. We are what? A hireling is, Christ was describing a hireling that, he was saying a shepherd, he was a shepherd and they're hirelings. When the hirelings see they see a beast, what do? They abandon the sheep and run away. And really, that marks a lot of what a hireling is there for the money. They're extractive. They'll extract the money for the money and go away. But they don't have a concept of ownership, of looking after the institution. This is why we are getting a lot of failed institutions that should not be failing, because there are no shepherds in the institution. So part of what we need to do is move out of being hire. It's a mentality. Hirelings. Get out of being hirelings. Please understand me. And anybody who does that, I'll guarantee you will get promoted. I have seen, not once, I have seen it countless times. When somebody transforms their mentality from being a hireling, of being an employee, of doing things, as I've said, only the minimum. When you transform and take an attitude of being an owner and looking at the business. You may be an employee, business, and then you become an overseer, become a shepherd. There will be a transformation. This is where you find stories of somebody who was a messenger, who was hired as a messenger. In a few years, is the CEO and running the business. It's because of that mental attitude. And that is repeated so many times. I don't know if anybody of you heard of Londro. You heard of Londro? Lonro was London Rhodesia. It was the company that had a lot of land around here. And the CEO was somebody known as Tiny Roland. Tiny Roland had been employed as a messenger. Lonro was a small company in Rhodesia. And he had been employed, I think, as a messenger, and then he became a porter. But because he hadn't gone to much school, but because he had that mentality, in a couple of years, he was this CEO, and he built it into a multinational corporation. And that's the mentality. It's repeated so many times. I can give you countless, even people I've seen, of people who had that mentality. And it's something that is very pertinent in Africa. A lot of us are hirelings. You know, the Lord has given Africa resources, a lot of resources, minerals, all this. You know, where we are, let me give you an example, even energy. You know, I know a bit of energy, kidogo, more than most people. Where we are is, there's a wind. You've heard of a wind power in Turkana. You know, Turkana is a tunnel. In the north is the Ethiopian highlands. To the south is the East African highlands. So Turkana is a tunnel. It can generate all our power. It can. And it is base generation because it is continuous. That's the Lord has given Africa, Kenya, East Africa, that. Of course, Ethiopia is full of, it's high, and there's a lot of rivers, so they can generate also. So energy full. Then the latest trends is solar. Africa can generate solar across the year. But let me tell you, unless Africans transform their mentalities, you're not going anywhere. Please take it to the bank. You've heard our leaders saying they are going to do this, they'll give this to this and that. You've heard all of them, all the leaders. They want to support this, they want to support this, they sound to. Unless there's a transformation of mindsets, that money will not help you. You understand me? Please understand me. It's not new. When Kibaki came into town, you know, Kibaki was old school. Let me give you something about money. Money has two parts. There is seed and there is bread. Are you hearing me? When you have money, there is seed and bread. So the Kibaki generation had more seed. So they did more investment. Then when he came into town, he reduced interest rates and told Kenyans go and borrow. So when Kenyans borrowed, what did they do? They made it bread. The Muse was very disappointed. You understand me? So all of us, this generation, and the younger people, we are into bread. We don't have seed. Let the Lord help us to understand what seed is. Seed is planted. So you don't do what? You don't plant bread. But you don't do what? You don't eat seed. Those two things you need to be very clear. Most of us eat our seed. And that is why a lot of the institutions are failing. Even institutions. You know, I worked for Kenya Power. I know the problem started when there was a lot of money and they didn't understand what seed was and what bread was. So they converted seed into bread. And that's where the problem is. More universities the same. When there was a lot of parallel and so forth, there was a lot of money. They didn't know what bread and seed is. So they converted everything to bread. Now they have problems because they didn't know what that seed would have helped them. It's the same principle. So that is why we need stewardship. Stewardship doesn't mean you have to be the boss in the institution, but it's a mentality. If you can learn to be stewards, if you can learn to be overseers, if you can learn to be pastors, it's a spiritual activity that if you can, then the institution will have a chance. And usually what I've seen is that even the transformation from hireling to owner, there's a change in that person's outlook, that person's position, everything. Now if they can take it to overseer, that is what this continent needs. And therefore there will be a transformation. If we can do that as a society, that will change. I keep telling people, I used to think that a lot of the Indian companies have Indian managers, and I thought it was racism. Now I know it is not racism. It is because they are better managers. Not that they have better papers, they are better managers. One for one. I've seen it, countless times, even in our industry. And I was tempted at one time to work with them. But I realized, no, I need to work and see how we can transform one at a time to transform our concepts of stewardship so that we can be stewards. I'll give you a few examples. Let me give you an example of what someone Nova School, when they were being built. That school was, the civil works was about 1 billion shillings. And when they did the tenders, I think there were some African companies that had won. But the guys, the engineers who were in charge, insisted that China Wuyi did it. And eventually it was given to China Wuyi. It was raining and there was COVID and what, but they did it and completed it in time. Of course, with a lot of supervision, but they did it. And those guys kept telling me, the African context of concept of a manager, when you give him award the tender, usually you award a tender and give somebody maybe 20% to mobilize himself. So he says, the context would have been, these guys would have got the 20%, bought himself some very good vehicle, got himself a second wife, and dashed to Dubai. And by the time they are supposed to be coming around, they are making noise as to what has, to increase the times because they haven't mobilized, and then ask for extra money to start, and eventually it becomes very rotten. And by the way, that's very true. We saw it, in projects that we did with Chinese. They don't even ask for certificates. In payment, when somebody is doing a contract, you finish a certain, let's say a quarter, you write a certificate for a quarter, you paid for a quarter like that. But the Chinese don't even do it that way. They'll come and finish everything and give one invoice after doing the job. It's cheaper usually when you do it faster. And it's an aspect of business, brethren, that we have to transform as Christians, as saints, before the rest of Africa do that. And if the saints can't do it, if they are still hirelings, I don't know, maybe the Lord will go to a next generation, but I wish this generation of Africans can change that mentality, can start living right. All that I'm talking about is lifestyle issues, things that we decide to do things right, things that we stop blaming people. When more universities failing, eating bread and seed and so forth, we are there also running around and blaming, rather than taking the responsibility and praying through some of the things. And by the way, when we see more universities, then maybe our own institutions would soon be there. And when we see things going wrong, we take charge of those and make the right decisions, influence the right decisions, pray into the right decisions. And I am guilty of this because what is happening in Kenya Power, I saw it and I was there then. And I could see the mistakes that management were making. Of course, I made a lot of noise, but it wasn't hard. I had not become a shepherd because I would have included a bit of prayer in that. But I saw it, for sure I did. And I think I was on a stage because I tried to make a lot of noise. And part of leaving was because I was frustrated by some of those decisions. And those decisions are what is killing it today. So it's something I want to challenge all of us, that we take ownership of what we are doing, where we are, and transform that environment. Become leaders, overseers, take a spiritual leadership and become, leaders on those. It's something I would want to ask that we do that. In Luke chapter 16, verse 12, it says, look after another's property faithfully. Then God will give you your own. It's really the same thing. The way to being promoted is out of how you look after the property. You are an employee. So get out of the hireling mentality. Get out of the employing an employer, an employee, just extracting and doing a little. Take ownership. Even beyond ownership, be an overseer in that place, and the Lord will bless you. Our time is truly gone. So on 6, they say, trust the law of sowing and reaping. It's a principle, sowing and reaping, that is big. It's a whole principle on itself. I hope we take time to read on that. Number 7, believe and ask God for the impossible. Believe and ask God for the impossible. Prayer and faith is such that we ask for impossible things and ask for that. Then build your business to the 4th generation. Proverbs 13, a good man leaves inheritance to his children's children. So basically what that means is become a good man. What is the biblical explanation for a good man? It means integrity, diligence. There are many things around that. And excellence should be basically what we should build into. Excellence. Sorry that I've taken your time, but it's something I thought is critical, the concept of stewardship. I want to ask you, who would want to upgrade their concept of stewarding resources, whatever resources they are in? Who would want to think overseer? Who would want to be a good steward of wherever we are? Who wants to transform? I want to ask whoever wants to take that stand of saying, I want to be a steward. Please stand up. Please stand up. We'll pray together. Whoever wants to say, I am going to transform. I'm going to take charge of the place of where the Lord has put me to be an overseer, so that I will make a change. I will not allow this institution or this business or this whatever to fall.